time, I will introduce them by name and affiliation only, but you can see their full bios on the page for this event on the Middle East Institute's website. First, we have Zakia Akra, who is a PhD candidate and research associate at Center for Mediterranean and Middle East and Islamic Studies, joining us from Athens, Greece. Next, we have Mohammed Baharoun, who's the director of Dubai Public Policy Research Center. Last but not least, we have Ibrahim Fraihat, who is a dean and associate professor in international conflict resolution at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Just a few quick points from me before we start. To submit your questions, please use Zoom's Q&A feature, which you can find on your Zoom screens. Feel free to ask a question at any time throughout the panel. I'll be looking for all your questions and we'll factor in as many as possible into the discussion. Now, let me turn back. As you could see, I was so keen to get this event started that I went through it fast because I really want to hear what our wonderful panelists have to say and share with us. Let me start with you, Zakia. And I will ask the question of Ibrahim and Mohammed as well. What has been the reaction in the Arab world or specific parts of the Arab world to events in the last 5 weeks in Iran? I mean, have you seen anything that caught your attention? Is there much interest in the Arab public opinion, what's going on in Iran? Is there sympathy or apathy? Where would you say we are?
First of all, thank you for inviting me to this gracious panel with all of you that are very much appreciated in the community. I would like to comment regarding the, as you said, the protests. I mean, depending on where you look, the reaction, I mean, there's overall a sympathy towards the protests. And even in the case of Palestine, despite within the last 5 weeks, a lot of violence has been going on. There has been comments of solidarity and sympathy towards the protests. This shows that despite the ongoing issues like what is happening in Iran right now is something that brings the Middle East together. I mean, it's a concern of solidarity and a point of reference for all the societies within the Middle East.
Great, thank you so much. Ibrahim, maybe you should go next and then I'll turn to Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation and for the discussion. I think two important factors that we need to keep in mind when we try to answer this question. One is that the region, the Middle East region, is, as you know, is a hugely polarized over the Arab Spring and the calls for change and the calls for freedom and all that, which started 10 years ago. So Iran played a central role in this, especially in Syria, in suppressing these calls for change and freedom and all of that in the region. So the position on these protests, actually, it's a reflection of the polarization of the region, meaning, those who support the cause for change and revolutions obviously are supporting the protests in Iran. And those actually who supported the counter-revolutions, Iran's position in Syria, they look at this as a conspiracy, as terrorism, as an American intervention, and all type of things. So that's the kind of reflection. The other factor actually is also to keep in mind, which is probably the slogan of these protests, that women removing the hijab. This did not appeal to certain or to segments of the Middle East societies, because hijab is still important for for parts of the region. So that's something probably did not appeal to certain audiences in the region. So we did not see a lot of interaction or sympathy with, from certain audiences. So I think these are the two factors to keep in mind.
That's great, thank you. Mohammed, that just to follow up, I mean, obviously do react to everything you heard, but that issue that Ibrahim just raised, that you might have sympathy with what's going on with the protest movement in Iran, but because some people see the protest movement not so much necessarily just driven by seeking freedom, but also essentially anti-religion and anti-Islam, certainly anti-clerical, that might put some in the Arab street sort of at unease. They don't know what to do with that part. What do you think of all that?
I think, I mean, I would second a lot of what Ibrahim just said. Basically, there are mixed emotion or feelings towards the uprising. And the reason for that, I mean, for instance, this is not the main thing you would see on the first page of Al-Ittihad or of Al-Bayan or any of the prominent UAE newspapers. That's not by any chance the major news on the newspaper. But the reason for the mixed feelings is number one, there is that aftertaste of the Arab Spring. And Ibrahim was very diplomatic by saying there are two people, either this or that, but there is an aftertaste, and it across the region from Algeria to Tunisia to Egypt to the rest of the region. So people see that and remember what happened after the Arab Spring, after the first euphoric reaction. There came a very somber relations. The second one is, some people are reacting to the cause, which is the killing of Amina. That's a major issue. And people have identified with that, this killing of taking life just because someone has either do not wear hijab or her hijab reveals a little bit of hair. That is absolutely something that people are against. But as Ibrahim actually said, a lot of people see sort of the demonstration action, not the reason for demonstration, as not very close to most of the people in the region who are more conservative than liberal in that case. So taking it away to become a hijab issue rather than the right of expressing yourself, the right of becoming yourself, the right to have a life are two different things. And that's the reason for those mixed emotions. As we see, there are, of course, there are people who see that those demonstrations are turning to become against the regime in Iran, which is seen as an outdated regime, so to speak, similar to the Daesh or the Taliban's, and and is destined to do. And this is one of those signs of its demise.
Thank you. It's really early usually for me to take a question so early in the panel, but there is a question because it links to the issue of hijab. So let me take it. And none of us are experts in religious Islamic affairs as such, but I love to hear all of your takes, or if anybody wants to take this. Is the hijab mandatory hijab? Because I don't know of this to be the case, but is it in the Quran that you have to have the hijab on, even if force is required to make sure you do have your hijab on? As I said, I don't know of any Islamic condition, but I'd love to hear your thoughts since we have a question on it. In the Quran, does anybody know what the position is?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding in the Quran, the hijab is there, niqab is not there. So that's the difference. Now, people react differently and have different interpretations. But again, people have been very ambivalent to idea of covering head. So how much you cover out of it. So there are people who will make sure that it is covered up to their eyebrows, and there are people who are a little bit lax about a few hairs that appear or half of the hair. But it's becoming more of either a fashion statement or a statement of liberties, and there's a lot of ambivalence to it, at least in our region.
Thank you, Mohammed. So let's turn to the main sort of core discussion for today, and turning to you again, Zakia. How would you describe Palestinian public opinion today towards the Islamic Republic, not the country of Iran, but specifically the Islamic Republic and its kind of political agenda? Just describe it to us. I guess that would be the best way to start the conversation.
Well, the Palestinian public, I mean, the last decade has been, a lot of things have been going on in the region, and we have to see this in relation to the general dynamic. Of course, the theocracy in itself and the Islamic, government in itself is not something, a model of appeal, let's say, in the way of governing. However, they are aware, I think, and it is a common knowledge that Iran, just like many other Arab countries, like other countries in the region, have used the Palestinian cause as a vehicle for their own agenda. Now, when that has become practical, and depending on which segment of the Palestinian public you're addressing, they've seen this, as a beneficial. This is an alliance that can help us regardless of the long-term goals that we might not have in common. So we saw that despite everything going on in 2012 and 2014 with the Gaza wars, there was the support from Iran, something that was not there from the rest of the region to that extent. So of course that is something to take in consideration. However, its regional policy, it's something that is frowned upon. And Iran is viewed, and its policies is generally viewed as a symptom, not as a cause of necessarily of all the issues. So, and definitely you have to see which side. I mean, the Gaza Strip has a different understanding in relation with how they view Iran, West Bank differently. And again, within Gaza, you have a different approach among people that are sympathizers to Islamic Jihad or Hamas. So there are mixed feelings. Overall, there is the understanding of, obviously, of the exploitation, to put it, I mean, it's not mildly put, but it is that sense, I mean, generally. But the isolation of the Palestinian cause at this point within the region, I mean, that, there's not a country that is actively standing on the side of the Palestinians, makes Iran, a little bit more appealing. However, the record is not so great, especially though mostly because of its regional politics.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Let me follow up with you very quickly on the issue of the Abraham Accord, something we're going to get into quite a bit, I'm sure, later on. But has the Abraham Accord of the last 2 years pushed groups within the Palestinian population that weren't necessarily close to Iran closer to Iran? Not necessarily Fatah, but is Iran still limited to the likes of Islamic Jihad and Hamas, or has Abraham Accords given it more opportunities among Palestinians and its message of mughawama, or the axis of resistance?
Well, in my opinion, not necessarily, again, because of a regional policy. However, we see this, for instance, with Hamas. The relations were not totally disrupted after Hamas, for instance, was in favor of the protests against the Assad regime. However, because of the Abraham Accords, we saw an active attempt from Hamas's part to re-establish the relationship with Iran, right? So other than the Islamic Jihad, but I don't see, there being more sympathy, especially not among Fatah. But maybe I would say a little bit, you do see a different discourse, I would say, among the leftists, in the sense that this since we have a common enemy, maybe it's closer to us than other Gulf states that are actually normalizing ties. So you do see this small differences, but I wouldn't say anything drastic, and precisely because of the regional agenda. And I repeat, it's not something personal, let's put it this way, but it has to do with its overall expansion and influence tendencies in the region.
Thank you. Ibrahim, let me turn to you. If you could take a step back and give us in a few words, sort of describe to us overall Iran's approach to the Palestinian issue and performance since 1979. I know it's a long time, but just how do you see it having evolved over the last 43 years? And what would you say if Iran is an enabler or a spoiler for the Palestinian cause today? What would you be on that point?
Well, I want to thank you, especially actually bringing up the point of the 19th. The Iranian position today, or the Palestinian position on Iran, cannot in any way be separated from the historical position since 1979. And I think to understand the position on Iran and its foreign policy, there are two important factors that determine the Palestinian position in Iran. One is the existence of a Palestinian leadership, a legitimate a Palestinian leadership with a vision to Palestinian liberation. That's one. And the other factor is the ability of the international community, or the US in this case, is to provide an effective peace process with a political horizon for the end of the conflict, right? So these are the two important factors, meaning in the past, since 1979, during the 80s and the 90s, there was a strong, effective, legitimate Palestinian leadership, Yasser Arafat, and there was a project, a national project, a liberation project. And also in 1993, there was a peace process. So during those circumstances, there was no position, or Iran's influence was at its minimum. So because the message itself, of the Iranian foreign policy is not what's appealing for the Palestinians, but it's the ability or the existence of an alternative, of an alternative that provides a horizon, for the end of the occupation and the liberation of the Palestinian people. So during those times, the Iranian influence was at lowest. Now, change of a Palestinian leadership, Mahmoud Abbas had absolutely, the vision that he started is not appealing to most Palestinians, is struggling with a legitimacy problem. He was elected back in 2007, was never renewed. And there you had a failing peace process that with the US totally supporting the stronger parties, supporting Israel, right, in its occupation. So Palestinians lost all types of hope and faith in an effective peace process that would end the occupation or lead to the liberation of the Palestinians. And this exacerbated by the absence of a legitimate or a representative Palestinian leadership. So during under these circumstances, of course, the Iranian message is thriving, and there is a huge support for it, because instead of this, Iran is presenting a different message: resistance, dignity, freedom, regardless to what extent this applies to the real world or not. That's a whole different story. But yes, Iran is presenting itself as the main backer of the Palestinian resistance, and resistance is gaining a huge momentum among the Palestinians in the absence and the failure of a peace process. So then, yes, there is a huge support. And then, yes, Iran can play this role. And also, I want to remind you of an important thing, which is the latest, that Iran was able to broker an agreement or an approachment between Hamas and the Syrian regime. And this week, actually, for the first time since 2011, we are seeing a Hamas delegation visiting Damascus and reconciling, relationship with the Assad regime. So this is a huge support also that Iran has gained. And it was Iran who brokered this rapprochement between Hamas and the Syrian regime. So there is definitely, Iran is gaining more support. Again, especially with the adding or the position of Hamas. And there are, to answer your question that you asked, Zakiya, also, that yes, there are people outside Hamas and Islamic Jihad, even among former communists or leftists or Marxists, right, that used to be Marxists. They're all in support of the resistance project, that Iran is supporting and Iran is backing during that level. And again, I think the two major reasons for this, that there is a huge disappointment for the failure of a Biden administration arriving Tel Aviv and declaring from Tel Aviv that he is a great Zionist and doesn't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist, and all this rhetoric. What do you expect the people to do? The people in this case, yes, they will buy into the alternative narrative that Iran providing dignity, freedom, resistance, and all of that. And that's why we're seeing Iran gaining momentum and support. And we have seen also this in the escalation of armed resistance in Jenin, in Nablus. We know that from the news and those who are launching these resistance activities, that Islamic Jihad is taking a leading role. And Islamic Jihad is closely supported by Iran. Historically, it was founded on that ground. And Islamic Jihad, despite its being a small organization, it's taking a leading role in the West Bank and shaping politics in the region, in Palestine, despite with that being effective. And I think that's the other factor we need to consider also of how effective this Iranian support is. And lately with the armed resistance, I think we have seen a huge gain on that level with the different armed resistance activities.
Thank you, Ibrahim. I will come back to you. I will turn to Mohammed now, but let me give you my question next I come to you, because this is really interesting what you mentioned. You said, former leftist, communists, and people who might not have any time for theocracy and Ali Khamenei's ideology are turning to Iran for basic material needs. Nobody else is out there to help them. So, there is a marriage of convenience that is being made here. Sometimes you see in the region, Iran being able to not just support a group materially, but actually shape its ideology. You see that with groups, Hashishabi and so on in Iraq. You've seen it elsewhere, but obviously most prominent case is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Elsewhere, with Bashar al-Assad's Syria, there is material support for Assad, but Iran hasn't really shaped the sort of appearance of the regime. It's still a Ba'athist entity, and Iran hasn't even tried to convert them to something different. But I want to ask you, is Iran going to try and convert the Hamases of this world to something else ideologically, or are we just talking about the supply of money and weapons at the most? But I'll come back to you on that, Ibrahim. Let me turn to Mohammed. Mohammed, I wanted to make sure we tackle the issue of the Abraham Accords head on, because that's the key here. That's the alternative to axis of resistance. And you're sitting in the United Arab Emirates, a country that believes that there is another way forward to help the Palestinians. And that's the argument I've heard from UAE officials, why they don't think they're throwing the Palestinians under the bus. This is an alternative. But where do you think Iran has been in terms of reacting to the Abraham Accords in actual fact, not in words, but I don't see them punishing UAE for Abraham Accords the last 2 years. What is your take?
I will first of all say that I commend Ibrahim for setting the compass right. You've asked if people have turned to Iran because of of the support. It's actually the opposite. Iran has turned to Hamas. Iran has turned to jihad because of the situation. So they were giving them material rather than these guys going to Iran and say, please help us. The second issue Ibrahim mentioned, which is I think important, is the source of legitimacy. Where does that come from? And because of the lack of either elections or achievements, be it in services or even in the peace process, we've seen that the only legitimacy that can be gained is through the muqawama. And that's where the Abrahamic Accords come in. And I think the Abrahamic Accord in its entirety is a way of, one, de-escalating this huge conflict that started to be a political conflict between Palestinians and Israelis, but then became between Zionists and Arabs, and then became between Jews and Muslims. And that was the window Iran has used. Its only way, its only access point to the region's issues is through the issue of Palestine. And I think for them, the Abrahamic Accord possibly provides an opportunity to regain that momentum, show the Palestinians that it's not the Arabs of the Gulf that's going to help you, it's us, the mullahs of Iran, who are going to help you. Mm-hmm. And I think this is where they see that for the first time, Hamas comes out and thank Israel for their support and the latest attack, because they wanted to show that this is the way, this is the source of the real support that the people may have. But the real question that everyone is asking, is muqawama actually the only way out of this situation? Or is exceeding or extending the muqawama to become, a sort of a clash between Jews and Muslims actually going to solve this or make it even worse? And I think that is where the Abrahamic Accord came in. It wanted to rationalize the discussion, and because there has been no negotiating. Nobody's negotiating. The Israelis are on one side, the Palestinians are on one side. The rest of the world, stops at making symbolic gestures, if you want. The Chinese and the Russians come and say, we could help, or we would like to help. But what have you done? All of these initiatives that actually came either in Madrid or in Oslo were Western. Camp David and everything was Western. So that we haven't seen people actually acting on it. And since the Arab Initiative, since the King Abdullah Initiative, nothing has happened. But what we've seen right now, I mean, a lot of people think that nothing really materialized over 2 years of the Abrahamic Accord. But this is a 70 years conflict. The 2 years is very, very small in terms of time. But what we have seen so far is someone like Yair Lapid coming out in the UN talking about the two-state solution, which was a no-no, a few years ago. We've seen Saudi Arabia take an initiative on reviving the Arab Peace Initiative, bringing in the Europeans, bringing in the Americans, bringing in most of the Arab states, trying to say, how can we bring this back? So all of these are positive changes, and there are ways of resolving the issue diplomatically, not through conflict. However, having said that, when you put or rationale against hot air and bravado, usually bravado wins, unfortunately.
Mohammed, let me ask you this. Zakia mentioned mentioned this, and so did Ibrahim, in the issue of Iran using the Palestinian cause as a vehicle to spread its agenda. If that is true, I don't know if you agree with that, but if you do, what do you think that agenda is among the Palestinians in the Arab world?
The Iranian agenda, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for them, Iran is a supporter of their case. And in the same way, Iran was a supporter of Al-Qaeda. It didn't believe in call it Sunni, call it Wahhabi, call it whatever you want to call it, in that ideology, but they did support them because in them they saw a common cause, which is against America. If there is a real peace agreement between Palestinians and Israel, what is the point of Muqawama? What's the point of Iran in this whole formula? It does not exist anymore. It will go back to become a Persian state.
Right.
So this is why they're supporting it, because it has the only thing that brings Iran closer to the region, make Iran aligned with people in the region, is their defense of, and that's why Quds Force is called Quds Force, not because it's fighting in Al-Quds.
Right, right. Thank you. Zakia, let me turn to you and ask you the following question. In your assessment, what is Iran getting, again, we've touched on it, but what is Iran getting right and what is it getting wrong in terms of its messaging, particularly to the younger demographic among the Palestinians? Ibrahim mentioned the age of Mahmoud Abbas has been there since 2007. There will be a post-Abbas period. I mean, how is Iran looking ahead? How is it trying to cultivate the younger demographic, the younger leaders waiting to come up among the Palestinians? What do you see?
I don't, and I think this relates to a point you asked earlier regarding to the one you intended to Ibrahim, about to what extent is Iran planning to shape a more ideological, to give a more ideological hue to its relationship with the Palestinian cause, other than the military and financial assistance for the Muqawama. I feel like any discussion beyond supporting the Palestinian armed struggle or the Palestinian cause, I do not feel that there is a sympathy beyond that to Iran. I repeat, even among the young people, even if it's an alternative, it's not an alternative model, as I said earlier, it's not an alternative political or religious model for many reasons that we could go on forever. But it is an alternative. I mean, actually, it's not an alternative. It's the only concrete support the Palestinians have. Again, once you talk to the Palestinian youth, or even, I mean, beyond the own alliances of the political parties, you talk about the Iranian position in the region, you will almost have an agreement towards what Iran is trying to do. It goes beyond the Palestinian cause, but we cannot, as Palestinians, afford to sideline the Iranians, given the isolation. I mean, given the isolation the Palestinian leadership has received from the Abraham Accords, or after, I mean, if you look at the PA, if you look at the Hamas, equally after what happened with Syria. So there, regardless of what's going to happen after the death of Abbas or not, Iran is a good friend, but a friend to keep a distance. I don't see an ideological coup among youth groups or like a Hezbollahization of any Palestinian groups. And I think this is an important point. And Ibrahim did mention it about supporting and sympathizing Iran. But I think it's very important to distinguish between the regime and the fact that the Palestinian cause is still high in the Iranian discourse, where it's non-existent in the Arab world. When we have the Abraham Accords, which, regardless of, it does not take into account the Palestinian cause at all. It's just a normalization with Israel for those states. It has nothing, it's just in the eyes of the Palestinians, the selling out of the Palestinians. I mean, this is how it's perceived. Whether there is an opportunity there or not, it is to be discussed, but the way it's perceived is there is a sellout, and the rest of the Arab world is weak. And I really would like to add the last point regarding where it's really important to look into the politics of the PA and Hamas and the Jihad Islam and the cultivation throughout the years with the Islamic Republic. All parties, in their own capacity, in different given moments, always had a relationship of give and take. Arafat was sidelined from the Islamic Republic in the beginning, after the U.S. embassy hostage, and were efforts of Arafat to become a mediator because it was starting later on. I mean, with the Iranian-Iraq war and let's say the contentious stance of Arafat vis-a-vis that war. But later on, because of the Oslo, Iran rejected the PA. I mean, if you had asked, if Arafat had reached out to Iran, he would say no. And I would seek you to see the difference. I mean, and Hamas, the same thing. I mean, it's important to see that between them, there is an alliance, let's put it this, there is a sympathy because of a common enemy, but nothing greater than that. I mean, 2015, after the nuclear deal with Iran, between the US and Iran, we saw Abbas was almost about to travel to Tehran, almost, but he couldn't afford to do so because they had to keep a safe distance from Iran, waiting to see what was going to happen on the front of the US-Israeli situation. So we can't exclude seeing the Iranian-Palestinian issue from the regional dynamics and the rivalry that exists. I think I overtook my time, but I felt like I had to share this thoughts.
Good, you did. We enjoyed it. Ibrahim, back to you. The issue of indoctrination, is it happening? Is Iran trying to shape these Palestinian groups, some of them at least perhaps, in its own image? And if it is it going to succeed?
Thank you. Let me allow me please to add just the third equally important factor why the Iranians' message is appealing and why Iran is gaining more influence. And I link this to the ideology, which is the third important factor, which is the Abraham Accord. The Abraham Accord has deepened the polarization on the issue of Palestine. And, the Palestinians viewed the Arab Accord as, their Arab brothers throwing them under the bus and normalizing with Israel. So it was seen by many as betrayal of the Palestinian cause and of their brothers. So this actually, there is a huge resentment in the Palestinian street against the Abraham Accord. And this is, of course, seen in, the boycott of the Bahrain economic workshop, and that was, all this started, and even the cold now relations between the countries signing the Abraham Accord and even the Palestinian Authority, not just the Palestinian state. So this actually has deepened the Palestinian position and sympathizing with the Iranian position again on the issue of resistance and axis of resistance. And we're seeing this actually, one of the results of this actually is the change of the Hamas position that we mentioned earlier and aligned with Syria. Now, in terms of whether this is also the impact is reaching to ideological levels, the straight answer, I don't think so, right? I do not think that with all what we're seeing of Iran's influence and Iran's gaining position in Palestine, that has to do with ideology. right? Though, I mean, there is no, Shia in Iran, and also the sectarian component cannot be separated totally, though many believe this is not a sectarian conflict, but the sectarianism is always there. So in terms of support of ideology, probably the closest would be is the Islamic Jihad. And as we said, Islamic Jihad is a very, very, very small, very tiny organization in Palestine, in the West Bank and Gaza. And Hamas is the major force, right, on the Islamic movement's front. And we saw what happened in 2011 when Iran took a position with the Syrian regime. Hamas chose to leave its headquarters in Syria, and their leaders to leave without supporting Iran or supporting the Syrian regime. So, and also let's keep in mind, though again this is not a sectarian conflict, Hamas is a Sunni. Is a Muslim Sunni organization. It's not a Shia organization. We can't put Hamas in the same basket with Hezbollah and the Houthis and or Hashd al-Shabi in Iraq. It's a whole different group. Hamas has only a national agenda. It doesn't present itself that has any agenda beyond fighting the Israeli occupation. It doesn't claim any, and even their relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood in 2017, whether this really happened or not, but declared disconnect from the Muslim Brotherhood. So, and going more domestic on the Palestine agenda, on the Palestine resistance movement against Israel, and repeating again, and even Hamas did reforms of implicitly accepting the two-state solution. So Hamas historically moving, if we look at these positions, actually, it's moving away from the Iranian position, not moving closer to the Iranian position. And of course, the others, the other Palestinian movements, like the leftists, they're more again communist and former communist and leftists, that they align with Iran mainly on one message: resistance and against the Israeli occupation. And Iran is playing this very well, right? Which is and it's also serving Iran's position really well. In terms of the proxy war that's happening between Iran and Israel, and where Israel is attacking Iranian targets in Syria and in Iraq, and even in Tehran itself, right, with the assassination of the nuclear scientists and all of that. So Iran also, through Islamic Jihad and escalation, can hit also in Palestine, like at the heart of where they can, and they're succeeding, and they're finding the message that's resonating with many during, due to the absence of, again, the three factors: an effective peace process, a representative Palestinian leadership, and also brother Arabs abandoning them and normalizing individually with Israel without addressing the Palestinian cause. So on that level, I think the position, back to your question, I think the position is a political, strictly political. I have not seen any influence on the ideological level, whether among Hamas or other groups. Even the most close organization, Islamic Jihad, did not gain more influence. It became more effective. Islamic Jihad, right, became way more effective than the past, but this can also be explained in terms of funding and resources available to them, and they are able to escalate with resistance and all of that. But in terms of more ideological or software, let me put it this way, software influence, I don't see that happening, and I agree with Zakiya on this one,
right,
on this point.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Mohammed, Ibrahim and Zakiya both touched on so many issues, and I might be wrong in what I'm taking away from it, but this is what I'm taking away from it: that Islamic Republic has spent 43 years investing in its role as essentially a spoiler in the Palestinian cause. I hear it's supporting, it's enabling, but it's not being taken seriously as an ideological sort of champion of the Palestinian groups. Even the ones that look to Iran, like Hamas, will go so far in their relations with Iran, with Islamic Republic. They will go as long as it's pragmatic from their perspective in terms of helping them, but they haven't bought into really Ali Khamenei's worldview. So this takes me to the issue that I wanted to ask you. You could turn around and say, well, this is clearly not in Iranian national interest. It's an ideological obsession by Ali Khamenei and the Islamic Republic, but this is not serving Iranian national interest. Iran's position on Israel, certainly, and what it's doing with supporting some of the Palestinian groups, has isolated it internationally. It's seen as a sort of a supporter of militancy and so forth. So how does the Gulf region, for example, that are taking a different approach, do you think, we've talked about this before, you and I, that's why I raise it, are there ways, mechanisms, arguments that you could try and convey in one way or another to the leadership in Iran, say, listen, you cannot outdo the Arabs on this issue. I hear Ibrahim say this is a Muslim cause, not necessarily just an Arab issue, but how do you convince the Iranians that they're better off for their own sake of national interest to take a different approach and not, try and be the spearhead of this axis of resistance that really isn't that deep when it comes to it?
I would say, Alex, that on the second part of your question, what Iran wants is a Palestinian state. And this is what the Palestinians want. And this is what all of the GCC countries want and all of the Arab countries want. And to say that the Abrahamic Accord is a replacement of the Palestinian state, that is wrong. I mean, plainly, Sheikh Abdullah came in on the day he signed and he said, we're committed to the two-state solution. This is something that the entire leadership of the UAE said. This is what the Moroccans said. This is what the Bahraini said. There is no difference in that. Now, this is something that the Palestinians have accepted, the two-state solution. If Iran wants to take all of the Israelis out of Palestine, then that's a different issue. If they want a Palestinian state in a two-state format, then there is an area for working together, because there is the same objective. There might be differences of approach, but then we can align those approaches. But this would go back to the first part of your question. Is this national interest or no? It is a foreign policy. The Revolutionary Guard does not guard the revolution inside Iran. They're not guards. They're emissaries. And that's why they operate outside Iran, not inside Iran. And we have not seen the Revolutionary Guard against the protesters. They're still operating outside, in Syria, in Yemen, in nowadays in Russia. So they're operating outside. They're not protectors. They're not guards of revolution. And if that is a major tool for foreign policy, then the Palestinian issue, maintaining its current position as there is no solution but the entire eviction of the Israelis outside of the region, throwing them in the sea, then yes, that's the damnation of the Jews. That is where it's going. So a real solution of the Palestinian issue is not in the best interest of the foreign policy, because that means Hezbollah does not mean much. Hezd al-Sha'bi does not mean much. Houthis does not mean much. And everyone else. Now, I will disagree with Ibrahim on the issue of Hamas and Bashar al-Assad. Hamas going to Bashar al-Assad does not mean a service for Hamas. For Iran particularly. It's a service for Bashar al-Assad. And a lot of Arab countries now would look at a means of rehabilitating the regime by bringing it back into the Arab region and reducing that type of effect. But Hamas's position, Hamas's support from Bashar al-Assad and even from his father before was known. Hezbollah's support from Bashar al-Assad and his father before was quite known. So this is not something new. It is not happening because of Iran has always used this as a tool of foreign policy, and it will continue to be there. And honestly, if this is possibly one of the reasons why you've seen during the demonstrations people taking signs of a street called Palestine and throw it on the ground, because they see that their real life, their own resources, what's supposed to be theirs, is being used outside to achieve something that is really not beneficial to them. So for the real people in Iran, that is not a national security issue or a national interest. But for the regime, it is a national interest. Now, on your issue, and I might take your role now as a moderator and ask Zakiya a question. In a sense, you've asked if people are changing their mentality or their views inside Palestine. I would ask her, how many people would rather take a ticket to Riyadh or a ticket to Tehran? Palestinians, young Palestinians in Ramallah. And that would tell you the reality. The reality is that there is no affinity, real affinity to Iran. There is bravado, yes. And people, when they're in a fight, they want people who would shout them. But in reality, if they want to live, if they want to educate, if they want to have a job, if they want to marry, Tehran is not a destination.
Right.
And but I would ask Zakiya.
No, I will allow Zakiya in a second to answer that, because that's a good question. But you and I could have a separate conversation on this. But you raised the issue of the Revolutionary Guards, and you said they're not at home; they're in the region. In some way, I disagree in the sense that certainly the suppression of the protest movement is being spearheaded by the Revolutionary Guards in Iran today. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But you're right in the sense that the Revolutionary Guards are guilty of having the wrong agenda for so long by being in the region and not doing enough at home. Whatever positive they could have done, instead have become this corrupt influence that is damaging the economy, that its only way in terms of dealing with angry Iranian public is to crack down and so on. But I mean, that would be the wishful thinking part in I guess all of us, if you had a scenario where the Revolutionary Guards would admit to itself that its foreign policy, its regional policy, its expansionist approach, its so-called forward defense is at heart why it's so disliked at home in Iran, that then it will be forced to choose to be a player, a power broker in Iran, or risk that by being engaged in the region, pursuing God knows what. But I'll turn to Zakiya to answer Mohammed's question, where are we buying tickets to, Zakiya?
Of course not Tehran, because as you said very correctly, I think the domestic situation, it reflects a lot of what is expected of it. And it's important, as you said, to focus on, yes, since we're in a war, we're going to have support people, we're going to stand by the people that support us, but that's it. But I would like, Mohammed, I agree a lot regarding how the foreign policy, like the Palestinian cause, is a foreign policy tool for Iran. Totally agree. But I also would seek to ask whether also Israel at this point is a foreign policy. I'm not so sure. I mean, we talk about the Israel-Iranian rivalry, but I'm not so sure that Israel is considered the strategic rival of Iran. We would have a total different discussion if we would have a different different balance within the Gulf regarding Iran and the Gulf countries, and how that would reflect to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. What would the Palestinian cause, and by extension, the tensions with Israel, to put it mildly, between Iran and Israel, would change if we had a solid U.S. Nuclear deal with Iran. So as much as the Palestinian cause has been a foreign policy card for the Iranians, as it has been, and I said this from the beginning, for many, many countries in the region, and something that the Palestinian people and the political figures know. This is old. This is something to have accustomed to, and try to get the best opportunities out of this at the same time. You don't reject such a situation. However, I think the real dynamics of how Iran could really contribute to the Palestinian cause, in effect, is also to see its role in the region. And I don't think it lies within the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and not even with its own issues with Israel, but within the Gulf and the US. And I take this back to you, Mohammed. I don't know if this makes more sense to you in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
I'll come back to Mohammed in a minute. We have about less than 10 minutes, about 7-8 minutes left. So Ibrahim, let me turn to you, and then Mohammed. It might not be bad to be a bit hopeful, and when we're sort of looking ahead, maybe a bit, just give us some hope. And one of the things I wanted to ask both of you, Ibrahim and Mohammed, is that, we talked about Abraham Accords. Look, Iran's not going to join Abraham Accords, right? It might accept it, and I think, in fact, it has accepted it. I see no Iranian real, red lines on this issue. UAE-Iran trade continues to be wonderful. Nothing has happened in terms of Iran's position on Bahrain because they joined Abraham Accords and so on. But there's another Arab initiative that I want to talk about, which is the Arab Peace Initiative, the Saudi initiative one. If you imagine a scenario where that becomes the topic of discussion again, that is taken seriously again. And we don't know where we are right now with the Iranian-Saudi dialogue. It was going some places for a few months, but right now relations are not good because the Iranians blame the Saudis to be inciting the protesters. But let's say they put this behind them, and it's a big if, but let's say they do. And the Saudis decide to introduce the Arab Peace Initiative that they conceived of. Would that be the sort of platform Arab world, the broader Islamic world, can sort of almost force Iran to say, look, this is what the Ummah, the Islamic nations overall want to do. This is the only game in town, and you need to join this, otherwise you're going to ostracize yourself. What do you think of that scenario? And make it hopeful if you can. If not, don't worry.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that the biggest hope we have here that the Arab Peace Initiative is not dead, at least for now, and I think that's mainly the hope that I have in terms of looking or things are being differently. Unfortunately, the Abraham Accord actually almost killed the Arab Peace Initiative, which was, again, the strength of the Arab Peace Initiative, that it put on the table a proposal that's unanimous among all the Arab and Muslim countries, is that for full withdrawal, for full normalization, and all of that. So that's probably the only time where we have such a strong proposal that's on the table and could have provided an opportunity. Saudi Arabia has at least officially not changed its position, at least for now. So we don't know what will happen. So I think there is still hope. We are hearing some statements also by Saudi Arabia re-emphasizing the role of the Arab Peace Initiative. So that's one important thing. Again, the Abraham Accord caused serious damage to it, but they did not kill it. So there are still where you can mobilize, some Arab position over this and have something different. The other hope I am hoping that to see is also an emerging Palestinian vision, right? Because also the Palestinian leadership bears part of the responsibility for this, because it has failed to provide a new vision, like for the liberation or the national liberation of the Palestinian people and ending of the occupation. Abbas, whether for whatever reason, seems to be in, like, his era is ending soon, so we don't know what will happen afterwards. His last speech he delivered in the United Nations was different from all other speeches in the past. Just a few days ago, he made a statement that he's disappointed of the US administration, which is everyone is in Palestine, because of seeing the huge double standard in the American position, where supporting the Ukrainian resistance against the Russian invasion for the right reasons, but also at the same time considering Palestinian resistance as terrorism. So this kind of hypocrisy and double standard also is contributing to an emerging or ripening a Palestinian vision and a Palestinian position in Palestine, more building an international solidarity movement among the people. There are changes in the polls in the US, especially in the Democratic Party, on the issue being more balanced on the issue of Israel-Palestine. Australia has canceled yesterday its recognition of Jerusalem, so there as Israel's capital. So I think, again, something needs to happen from the Palestinian side as well, which will provide hope. And again, whenever we have progress on the Palestinian side, towards the end of the occupation, we can see things going back, everyone going back to his original position, Iran on Iranian affairs and all other things. But if this vacuum cannot stay forever. It has to be filled by someone. the US is not filling this political vacuum, the Palestinian leadership is not filling it, then yes, by all means, Iran will, right? And Iran is filling this vacuum. So again, the hope is, there is hope, both on the official level with the Peace Arab Initiative, that it's not totally dead, and also in terms of changing on the international solidarity move on the people's level towards the Palestinian cause, and also from the Palestinians themselves with the end of the Abbas era. These are the 3 points that I could think of and see as hope for the future.
Thank you. We take any hope we get. So, Mohammed, you get the last word. You wanted to maybe respond to Zakia's comment, and then whatever you want to say in terms of the Arab Peace Initiative or anything else.
Yeah, I don't disagree a lot with Zakia, but I do disagree now with Ibrahim. So one, the claim that the Abrahamic Accord killed the peace initiative, I have no idea where does Ibrahim come with that conclusion. There is, I don't have one single statement from any government leadership official or even people on the street who see that the two-state solution, which is the basis of the peace initiative, is out. No one is saying that, and I don't know where does he come up with this conclusion. On the second issue, Iran will try to fill the vacuum, but honestly, my own estimate from everything that I'm monitoring, and I'm not in Palestine, so I cannot really give a good assessment of that. But it will try to fill the vacuum, but it will not. Now, if you look at the Saudi-Iranian relationship, there is no more that Sunni Shia crescent. That discourse has fell down. The Saudis are not following it up. Inside Saudi Arabia, a lot of movement on the Shia community. They're part of the community. Outside in Iraq and others, they're talking to the Shia. So this concept of an ideological struggle between Saudi and Iran is not there. And this explains why Saudi Arabia is engaging with Iran and why Iran is engaging with the Saudis as well. So in that sense, I don't see that at this point, there is that huge rivalry between Saudi, and this is the answer to Zakia, between Saudi Arabia and Iran. There is that rivalry continues between Iran and Israel. Saudis can talk to the Iranians can talk to the Saudis, but they will not talk to the Israelis directly. Israelis, and they accuse the Israelis of conducting clandestine operations inside Iran. They're not accusing the Saudis of doing that. They've attacked the Saudis directly or indirectly, and the Saudis did not take them to the International Court of Justice. So there is a different dynamics now between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that's why I will never equate that type of rivalry between Saudi and Iran with the rivalry between Iran and. But hopefully, Saudi Arabia is doing a lot right now on the Arab Peace Initiative, and I think that could be one of those issues. And in the security talks between the Saudis and the Iranians, how can you support this? The problem is that the Iranians have never accepted the two-state solution.
Right.
So
Alex, can I briefly
accepted it, but the Iranians did not. That's my understanding so far.
Alex, can I briefly answer Mohammed's question where I came up with the conclusion?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, just very briefly. Well, it's very simple, Mohammed, my friend, which is the Arab Peace Initiative offered full normalization for the Israeli withdrawal from the Palestinian territories. What the Abraham Accord did gave full normalization without withdrawal. So it's presented without any withdrawal, and actually not only without withdrawal, with annexing more Palestinian land. So that's how it presented itself as an alternative to the Arab Peace Initiative and undermined it. That's how
we need to have a private discussion on this, but you have a very wrong view.
Forget to call me in.
I tell you what we need.
I will.
We need to get my good colleague Khalid Al-Gimni, who runs the Palestine program at the Middle East Institute, to run that panel, because that's outside of my purview. I wanted us to have a discussion on Iran's role in the Palestinian issue, how it's perceived. And I thought you did a wonderful job, really excellent job in giving us really good insight into what the Palestinian side perceives Iran is doing. So I thank you for that. I thank for all the audience members who joined us for today's panel. Thank you for your questions. I tried to integrate as many of those questions as I could into the discussion. So I just, with all that said, I want to say thank you to Zakia, to Ibrahim, and to Mohammed for joining us today. And I hope we'll have you again on another panel soon on a similar topic or a different topic. So let me